We're continuing this series on Life Interrupted, finding God in the midst of the chaos today. Last week we started with a challenging day in the life of the church and all of us, the 15th anniversary of 9/11. We talked about the chaos of that day and the chaos that has left our world and our country in since that day 15 years ago. Today we're going to turn to a text. It's in the Gospel of John. It's the only place you'll find this particular story, and it is really a different kind of story from any others that are in the New Testament. I'll invite you to look at the screen or look at your own Bible or a pew Bible as we read the 5th chapter, beginning with verse 1. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem by the sheep gate there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethzatha. This is a challenging word. Sometimes it says Bethzatha, others Bethsaida. Sometimes we just say Bethesda. It has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. Take note of that sentence, 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he'd been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" Take note of that question. It's the question. Do you want to be made well? The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." And Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat and walk." And at once the man was made well. He took up his mat and began to walk. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. It might not seem obvious at first when you read this particular scripture that this is a story about interruption, about disruption, about chaos. But if you read the story carefully and start dissecting it into its various parts, you'll discover that in some ways, this particular story could be the poster child of all the New Testament stories about what it means for life to be interrupted. For example, when we take this man's story into account, this is what we know about this man. There are a lot of things we don't know, but this is what we know about this man. That 38 years ago, his life had been interrupted in a rather dramatic way. We don't know what it was, whether it was a stroke or a brain bleed of some kind, whether it was the onset of some kind of chronic illness, whether it was some kind of terrible disease. We don't know what happened to this man, but we do know that he, 38 years ago, had been struck down with what was surely a debilitating disease or accident of some kind. And of course, you know about that because it's happened to some of you. Life brings all sorts of luck, sometimes good luck and sometimes bad luck. And if it hasn't happened to you, it's happened to some good friend or loved one of yours, an accident, the phone call in the middle of the night, a stroke, a chronic disease. If you stop and think about it, every single one of us can identify with this story about a man who has been struggling with a health and physical issue for decades. So life had interrupted his life had been interrupted in a rather dramatic way almost 4 decades ago. The next set of interruptions we find in this story is the one he tells us about, the daily interruptions. He's at this pool. The story, of course, is that the pool at Bethsaida had healing waters. And I guess once a day, maybe twice a day, I don't know, 3 times a day, whenever the waters get stirred up. And when the waters would become stirred up, start bubbling up kind of like a whirlpool, when that would happen, if people would get into the waters had healing power. And so he tells this story himself. I've been here 38 years. But the problem is, this is the story he tells. The problem is, every time the waters get stirred up and I try to get down there into the water, somebody jumps in front of me. And by the time I'm able to get into the waters have calmed down again. And so I've been here 38 years waiting for healing. I never thought about this until yesterday. I was going over this story in my mind. I thought, I couldn't help but think of the movie Groundhog Day. Most of you have seen Groundhog Day. This was this man's personal Groundhog Day, wasn't it? I mean, he was living it out over and over and over again. Every day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year, 38 years, Groundhog Day, the same thing happening over and over and over. At first, that might seem really bizarre to you, that anybody would do that over and over again like that, 30 years. Truly bizarre. When you stop and think about it, the truth of the matter is that human beings are remarkably adaptive. And that's a good thing. We're adaptive. We make our compromises with current circumstances. But sometimes being adaptive means getting into a rut or doing the same thing over and over and over again. It means living out your personal Groundhog Day. And then the third interruption we read about in this story is really the most important interruption. It's the major interruption of Jesus. Jesus comes along, he sees all these people at the pool, but he picks out this man. He was remarkably intuitive, I think, this man, Jesus. He picks out this man. And he asked them what was honestly a deeply, deeply disruptive question for this man in his life. And he says, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? Now, it's really, really interesting. The man really doesn't answer the question. Did you notice that? The man doesn't answer the question at all. He just begins to tell the story. He doesn't say yes or no. He just says, well, every time I get into the pool, somebody gets in front, try to get in the pool, somebody gets in front of me. And so it's a curious thing, I think, when you read the story. I think the reason he didn't answer the question is because the question is, in fact, so disruptive. It causes one to think about life in ways that sometimes are really uncomfortable. The question, do you want to be healed, is one of the most disruptive and perhaps one of the most important questions that can ever be asked about your life or mine. I was reading this. I refer to my friends in recovery all the time. It's just because I've learned so much from them. I was reading this and I thought, you know, the people who understand this the best are those who are in recovery. I have lots of friends in this church and outside of this church, around the country, who are in recovery, and I've learned so much from them. The truth of the matter is that they're not any different from the rest of us because we all have our own issues. The thing about those who are in recovery is that they know what their issue is. They've dealt with it. And because of the 12 steps and because of the support they get from one another, they have these remarkable insights about what it means to get on with life. And so if you'll talk to someone who's in recovery and ask them about that question, do you want to be healed? They will tell you that is the question. That is the question. A lot of you have this experience. If you have a friend or a loved one who is addicted, it really doesn't make any difference what you want for them. You can love them deeply. You can offer them all sorts of support. You can offer financial support. You can do research about the best places around the country to go to find healing and hope. And it really won't make any difference until they get to that point where they say, now finally, I want to be healed. Usually, it is a spot in life that is so painful that there aren't too many options left. But that's the question, isn't it? And so let's talk about you and me and the rest of us. Like I say, the question applies to every single one of us because all of us have an issue or issues, don't we? There are people who have been struggling in a bad marriage for 38 years. And we're so adaptive as human beings that we just get used to it. And nobody even asks the question anymore, do we want to have a better marriage? And if we do, what might we do about that? There are people in painful or toxic relationships. Sometimes it's just a friendship or a sibling. And it's been going on for years and years and years. And maybe the question ought to be asked, do we want this relationship to be healed, or do we want it to be ended? I've known people who've been in jobs for 38 years. They get up every morning, they dread their job, they hate their job, they eat breakfast and they get in their car and they make the commute to their job, hating every moment of it. But they've been doing it for so long, it just doesn't make any difference. They've adapted to it. And they stopped asking the question about the possibility that maybe there could be something different in life. So you can go on and on with all sorts of examples about this. It really doesn't make any difference what the example is that's most pertinent to me or most pertinent to someone who is addicted. What is important is the example that's most relevant for your life. The question, Jesus asked the question, what a remarkable, disruptive question it is. Do you want to be healed? I want to share something with you, and I hope you'll kind of tune into this, because I think this is the most important insight that I've had, at least in 20 years. And I don't take credit for it. I come by it in my own personal experience and in difficult ways, but I've read people and had other people help me to understand this. But I think it's extremely important. The twin emotions of anger and fear are what blocks us in our relationship with God. Anger and fear. I mean, it just comes down to those two emotions, what I call the twin emotions. They block us in our relationship with God, and when we are blocked in our relationship with God, we are blocked in all of our other relationships, and we're somehow stuck in life. So let me just be fair about this and talk about the good things about anger and fear. A lot of you know Dr. Walt Perky. He retired from our staff maybe 2 years ago. PhD psychotherapist and ordained United Methodist minister. What a remarkable, insightful person he was. And I remember Walt used to say, he said, you know, there are 4 emotions you ought to feel and experience every single day: joy, grief or sadness, anger and fear. He says that's what it means to be human, is to have those emotions. He said, but the way you ought to deal with that is to speak them out loud. This is really a great day. I'm loving today. I'm really sad right now. This is what I'm sad about. This is what I'm afraid of. This is what I'm angry about. This is pretty good advice. It's good advice I tell my grandsons this, but believe me, it's just as good advice for those of us who are grandparents. I tell my grandsons, look, it's okay to be angry. Everybody gets angry every day. Use your words. Use your words, right? This is what I'm angry about. That actually is the therapeutic source of being a healthy person. Use your words. So there's nothing wrong with being angry every single day. There's nothing wrong with experiencing fear or anxiety every single day. What happens to us as human beings is when we get to the point that we just shut down and we don't acknowledge what it is that we're angry about or afraid of. And when that happens, life begins to eat away at us. Life begins to eat us up. So let me just share a little bit more about this insight. The problem with anger and fear, if we have unarticulated anger, what it will do is it will chain you to some event or to some relationship in the past. You literally will be imprisoned by this event or this person or this relationship or these persons in the past. You can't get out of it. And if you have unarticulated or dealt with anxiety, it will chain you to the present. You'll be unable to move forward in life. It is anger and fear that blocks us in our relationship with God and therefore hinders our relationships with others and prevents us from moving joyfully into the future. This is what I think happened on that particular day. I'm going to expand the story. I'm making a little bit of this up, but I think it's probably on target. It's not in the story itself, but I think this is what happened. Jesus said to this man, "Do you want to be well?" And this man told this story. And then Jesus asked another question. He said, "Tell me, what are you angry about?" And the man said, "Well, I've already told you what I'm angry about. I'm angry about the fact that every day I get up and I try to get into these healing waters and these people get in front of me. I'm just really angry about that. How's that for using my words?" And Jesus said, "What are you really angry about?" And the man said, "I'm angry about what happened to me 38 years ago." And then Jesus said, "What are you afraid of?" And the man said, "I'm afraid that if I were healed, I would not know how to go forward in life. I wouldn't know what to do with my life." Jesus, in asking that question, that deeply disruptive question, "Do you want to be healed?" liberated this man from his anger and his fear, from his past and his present, liberated him for the future. It could happen. It could happen to you or me.